4, 3, 2, and you are go.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for checking in with us. My name's Don Mann, and this is my new radio show. I hope you're all going to join in on a regular basis. Third Sphere Radio is the name of the production company. We have an idea here of what to do together regarding some things that might affect your mind, your body, your spirit, things that might pick you up and move you in another direction. And one of the things that I wanted to do first of all was to introduce myself a little bit, since none of you know me. Well, maybe a few people do in the studio. My name's Don Mann, and I'm not anybody. I am not a politician. I'm not a historian. I'm not a professor. I'm not a minister. I'm currently not employed. I'm not a right winger. I'm not a left winger. And I tend to believe that there's some wisdom on both sides and in all areas. So I'm trying to look for that. Some of the things that I read and some of the things we discuss together. On that note, I wanted to mention to you that if you wanted to call in and talk a little bit about something that comes up along the way, the phone number for the station is 609-807-2492. That's 609-807-2492. So a little bit about me to get started. I am a Christian, and I do come from that perspective. That's my background. That's my life. I can't change that. I know some of you may not be. I know some of you maybe follow another religion, but I just wanted to bring that up. Some of the folks that might be calling in may be calling in from a Christian perspective. But overall, the point of this discussion in many ways is to shed light on each other, and rather than create divisions and create groups that are antagonists to each other, that we might get together and actually agree on some things. Wouldn't that be nice for a change? I'm really, really tired of all the tribalism and the groups and the division that much of the media has caused for us. I'm very tired of all the bickering, the division, and real acrimony that seems to be part of our discussions lately. So maybe we can cross that divide as well while we're talking. I would frankly like to use our time together to make the world a little bit of a better place. I don't know I think informing people to a certain extent does make the world a better place, but I think the way it's often positioned now is in such a way that just wants to fire people up and make them angry, just eat some red meat. And the world doesn't really get any better that way. Ultimately, I think that there's some wisdom on both sides, on all sides, that we need to find within each other if we're going to get together, get along, move ahead. I think it's also reasonable to bring up the current environment that everybody's in, this virus situation. And first of all, let me just say, I hope that all of you are hanging in there. I know it's a super difficult time. I know that we are all under tremendous mental stress, financial stress, family stress. I mean, we can go down a list, and I'll probably miss some of them, but there's all sorts of things on people's minds right now. What does the future hold? What does life look like for us down the road? How do we move forward? So it's a really good time to actually sit and take note of things. I feel like we're in kind of a great big timeout. Maybe God just gave us a great big timeout here to sit down and think about it all again. And so I've been doing that as well. As you can tell, if you can see me on the screen, I'm not a young guy. I'm in my 60s. But so I've lived a while, and I've tuned into quite a few subjects along through my life. My family was one which always had 3 or 4 newspapers around the house every single day. So I always read things from all different perspectives. So I'm kind of used to that. And I've been reading a lot of history and a lot of books my whole life, and trying to think about it all. And now that I'm at this point, I'd like to try to use it in some way. I've written a book. I'm writing my second book. I've written a couple plays we put on in New York. I'm working on a film right now. So we're trying to express some of these ideas in various types of content. And this is exactly that, another version of the content that I've been working on. Maybe we can touch on some of those things later on. One of the things that's come up with this whole COVID controversy thing is all of us are suddenly met with the reality that we might be dead soon. Something we don't think about that often. Maybe people who have a chronic disease, maybe it's more in their mind, and I hope that and pray that they can continue to succeed in their fight against these things. But now we're just like them. It's like we've all got some chronic disease right outside our door, and any time a contractor comes up to our door to talk to us, or we walk down the street, or we go through a store, we're thinking, I got to protect myself. I can cover myself up. So the idea of our mortality is right there in our face all of a sudden. And the things that were the most important to us suddenly aren't that important anymore. Cars, which we don't drive that much anymore, and many of the material things. Now, some of us are under some real financial stress, and that's an ever-present problem. And that I think there's some people trying to fix it in the government, et cetera, but it doesn't always reach everybody. It's never perfect to try to do something on such an enormous scale that will work through thousands of banks and have perfect seamless entry into people's lives and pocketbooks and bank accounts. Seems to be something that a government or something of that scale just can't seem to get right. I don't hold it against them. I can't imagine what it's like to try to implement something. I've tried to manage some relatively small things, and I can't get it right. I can barely manage my household sometimes. So it's a challenge, and I hope and I pray for all of you that you can find some strength and some peace and work your way through it. It's a battle. One of the ways I try to do that is by making sure I exercise the different parts of my being. And I've tried to raise my children this way, and I've tried to live my life this way. But I find that if I use my mind, if I work out my body, and I also work out my spirit, then I feel whole. And if I miss any of those things, if I become stagnant in reading or thinking or discussing things or writing things, if I don't work out or exercise, if I don't maintain my relationship with God, then I find that something's missing, something's fallen down for me. And so I know what it is. Oh boy, I let this drop. I need to get back at it. I need to work out some more. So I would just ask you in this time right now, or suggest to you maybe, to think about those three things, mind, body, spirit. And if you're not touching on those things in some way, if you're not exercising yourself in some way, then you're going to feel kind of bad that day. You're going to miss something. So whatever it is, go online, find an exercise program, just do it, right? Go to church, get online to go to church, which is the way a lot of people are doing it now. Call a friend who's a spiritual leader. Read a good book. Read a book that maybe you haven't thought about reading, that maybe isn't in your foray. Use your mind. Do a crossword puzzle. Do something, right? Just keep going, because this isn't going to take us down. The 1918 Spanish flu didn't take us down, which is what they call the Spanish flu, although it's probably from somewhere else. The various crashes throughout history that went on for many, many years in some cases, like in the 30s, didn't take us down. World wars didn't take us down. We're going to come through this fine, and we're going to get better. It's just that you have to maintain yourself as we try to do this. So that's a message that I wanted to give. And while I'm realizing my own mortality, one of the things that I wanted to do was try to forge some kind of reconciliation. And one of the main things of reconciliation that I find is important and is really, really damaged in a relationship that needs to be fixed. There's one relationship that really, really needs to be fixed. And that's our racial relations, right? We have had a terrible, terrible history of race in this country. It started from the very beginning when the founders signed the contracts of the Constitution, the Declaration, and they let slavery exist within our borders because, frankly, they wouldn't have been able to get the people from the South to sign on to it if they didn't. So they made a bargain with the devil, and they chose to get the country started and let that go. And frankly, everybody was pretty racist back then. It just was the way it was. Now, I don't want to minimize the fact that there's racism everywhere, and then there's racism all over the world, and it's been going on for centuries. Slavery's been going on for centuries. All these terrible things seem to be part of the human psyche. It seems to be what we do. We always are looking for some group to minimize. We're always looking for some group to control. Just look at the history of the world, whether it was the Egyptians with the Jews, whether it was the early Irish who came into the United States, whether it was obviously African American slavery, whether it was an Indian tribe that fought another Indian tribe and conquered them and then took all their people slaves, whether it was the Aztecs, whether you name it was everywhere, right? So it's part of our condition that we look down on someone, we hate people, we find a reason to find difference and then feel superior to that. There's also economic superiority that comes into that. So we went through this 250 some odd years of slavery within our own borders, the colonies leading up to the country. We fought this tremendous civil war, which was supposed to end everything with that the new amendment to the Constitution. And then we go into Jim Crow South. And there's another 100 years of institutionalized racism in the South. There's a prison system that's built on free labor, because if you couldn't have them as slaves anymore, then we'll just arrest them, put them in jail, make them work on somebody else's plantation. And the same plantations that they worked on as slave folk, then they ended up working on as prisoners. And many of those companies that were plantations founded businesses that are prisons, and they're behind some of the prisons that we have today. Then you go through, right through the Great Migration, where people finally, said, you know what, we don't have to live in the South anymore. We can leave. There's nothing keeping us here. Now, they had to escape still. They could have got caught and thrown into jail for trying to leave, and that happened to some. But people got out, and they made their way to the northern cities. They made their way past the Mason-Dixon line. They went to New York. They went to Harlem. They went to Chicago. They went out west. Chicago and Detroit and all those major cities ended up to be the places. Now, they found another kind of racism when they went there. There was a racism of redlining, where you weren't allowed to live outside of a certain place. There was racism for work. There was all sorts of confrontations there that were different from the South, but yet based on the same thing. So that happened until you have, this is, I just breezed through generations of people, right? Generations of people who had a terrible situation. And what happened to them? Their families were split apart during slavery, and then they tried to stay together during the course of it. I was just reading a book about the Great Migration, and talked about how when people moved to the cities, the poverty in the cities and the drugs and the cultures there infiltrated people's families, people who moved away to they thought a better place. So lots of tragedy, lots of pain, lots of suffering, more than I can even comment on. There's so much. It's just absolutely horrendous, the crimes against humanity that were created in this country. And I know that. And at the same time, I know that it's a great country. And that's what I want to bring together, if I can. Like I said, I'm not anybody here. I'm just some guy talking about it. And maybe through talking about it, we can make it just a little bit better. I did write a book at one point called, I'll hold it up here so you can see the cover. It's called Hang John Brown. It's a novel, historical fiction about John Brown, the abolitionist. And so there were people, particularly in the North, who knew that this was a sin and knew that they had to fight it. And in fact, John Brown did some things leading up to the Civil War. He was one of the leading causes of the Civil War. The reason that the powder keg exploded when he went into the Kansas territory and killed some pro-slavery people that weren't even slave owners, by the way, but they were pro-slavery, and they wanted to get Kansas territory to become a slave state. See, the whole story was to make the South have additional states so that they would have more power in Congress. So you had the original slave states in the South, and as we went west as a country, they wanted to make sure all those states could become slave states, and then they could dominate the political agenda. So John Brown said that was not going to happen, and he went down with his sons and went into Kansas and settled there for a little while, and then went out and slaughtered some people. And this was when the South finally realized that the North was serious, that this thing was going to end and that they were in danger. And so the whole thing exploded and led up to eventually a couple years later, the war in Fort Sumter. So there was a really interesting study. It's on Amazon.com. You've got to put in Hang John Brown by Donald Mann. I don't know why it doesn't come up when you put the title in alone, but Hang John Brown by Donald Mann. And it really delves into that whole history of Bleeding Kansas and John Brown, and from the perspective of a pro-slavery person. So, that's just a few of the things that have been going on in my small mind. One of the things that's going to happen later as well in this production is in this program is a guy named GWYN who's going to come on and read some of his poetry. He is due in about 8 minutes. And then later on, the Reverend Paul JEANES of Trinity Church in Princeton will be on the line to further the discussion. And like I said, if somebody wants to call in at some point, 609-807-2492 is one way you can do it, 609-807-2492. But so there's been a lot going on in this country. And one of the things, if we're going to move forward in any sort of reconciliation, whether it's the reconciliation of a marriage or the reconciliation of a family, is we have to admit the things that have happened. We have to admit fault. And I'm here for my small way, to admit fault and to say to you, if any of you out there are African American and any of you folks are from a family that has known connections to slavery, or if any of you have just experienced racism, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry that history is what it is. There's no qualifications to that. I'm just sorry for it. And I wish it never happened. There's so many things in history that I wish I never happened, but they did. And now we have to move forward. We have to figure it out and move forward. We have to find the value of each other. We have to forgive and forget the past. And we have to move on in some new arrangement. And I don't know what that arrangement is, but it isn't going to start unless we all admit these things. So I really wish political figures, I think there's a feeling among some people that we've tried to make things better. There's been programs and there's been museums built and there's been lots of things, but there's still an underlying problem in that we haven't fully and openly admitted the past. And there's still, let's face it, there's still racists out there. And while I don't want to hate anybody, if there's anybody I'm going to hate, it's people that hate. And to hate somebody just because of the color of their skin, or their ethnic background, or their religion, or you name it. I mean, what are they thinking, right? We're all on the same planet here. We've all got different pigmentation. We've all got different backgrounds. We've all got different history. We've all got different cultures and upbringings. There's a 100 reasons why everybody's different, but there's one main reason why everybody's the same. I believe everybody's a child of God, and we're all the same. And behind that idea is the idea that we have to find a way to get along, to get together. Now, there's many problems to be fixed. And I don't propose to have all the reasons for that. But I do believe that if we're centered, if we're practicing good mental health, good physical health, good spiritual health, it will be centered enough to find some of those things. And we'll be centered enough to find the good in things. I think we need to be glass half full people, not glass half empty people. I think they found that negativity is contagious. And you can do a study on it, and do these various studies that they've done of people who enter in and begin a negative dialogue. If you start talking negative, everybody's going to go negative, and nobody likes to be around negative. Now, that being said, if my whole life, my whole background, my whole history, everything about it didn't have anything good in it all, I don't know what I'd do. So I'll ask you to find something there, and find something to be positive about. Practice some good fitness for your mind, body, and spirit, and open your mind up and keep thinking. And look for reconciliation where it can happen. Don't go to bed angry with your spouse. Don't go to angry with your friends. You know, like the love your neighbor thing really works. It really does. If you just be nice to people, if you stop fighting with people, if you stop yelling at people, if you stop taking drugs and selling drugs, if you stop, being an abusive relative, or if you stop being an abusive police officer, if you stop being an abusive person to other people in any way, whatever your background is, you're going to find that your life's going to improve. Now, I've got a gentleman coming on the show right now who's going to talk for a little bit with me. His name is GWYN, and Jim began writing poetry and fiction in the 60s. His poetry has appeared in numerous anthologies and journals, including the Patterson Library Review, the Poet City, the Edison Literary Review, Poetry of Place, the Rutherford Red Wheelbarrow, and Seventh Quarry, the Swansea Poetry Quarterly. He's appeared as a featured reader in many venues throughout New Jersey and across the United States. In 2011, he was invited to read at the Dylan Thomas Poetry Theatre as part of the first International Poetry Festival in Swansea, Wales. He was the 2008 first prize winner of the Allen Ginsberg Poetry Contest, and he has received 8 Pushcart Prize nominations for poetry. Jim's been published in numerous anthologies and magazines. In addition to the Patterson Literary Review, recent works are in Lips, the Rutherford Red Wheelbarrow, Seventh Quarry Swansea Poetry Quarterly, and his first prize in the Ginsberg Poetry, and 8 Pushcart Prize nominations. So Jim GWYN is a good guy. He has been on my in a play with me that I wrote about Vincent van Gogh that we put on in New York about 5 years ago. He played my father. I played Vincent van Gogh, and he played my father. And if you guys would unmute Jim right now, I don't know if he's on. You there, Jim?
I hear you. Can you hear me?
I hear you. Very good. Nice to see you, buddy.
You too.
Now, Jim played Father Van Gogh. Van Gogh was obviously a painter, and his father was a minister. And was it Methodist Church? I forget. It was Methodist Church, right?
Dutch Reformed.
Dutch Reformed, right? See, I wrote it, and he knows it better than I do. But Jim was
Dutch Reformed also.
Yeah, Jim had never acted before and just walked right on stage and did a really good job. So how you doing tonight, Jim?
I'm doing very fine, thank you. Been listening to your show. It's good.
Good. Well, you might be the only one. You and Paul Jeans. I see Paul sitting there in the waiting room too. That's great. That's great. Well, thanks for coming on.
You're welcome.
So tell me, what are you working on? Are you writing anything new lately?
Actually, yes. I'm working on a lot of things, it seems. I've been a little fallow for a while, but I've been pulling out some pieces during all of this time home. Of course, I've been retired for a couple of years, so you're welcome to my reality, you know?
Yep.
I'm at home and just working away. I have a poetry journal that I do for a friend of mine, do all the production and layout. That keeps me busy, editing. Still working with words.
Good. Well, one of the reasons why Jim is here, and maybe we could talk a little bit about it, is to read some of his poetry. And one of the pieces that we chose for tonight was a poem he wrote about Jackie Robinson. Can you talk about that a little bit, Jim? Your writing of that and what inspired you?
Well, actually, my wife and I started putting together maybe about 10 years or so ago a series of poetry readings that we actually conducted at her church, the Christian Reformed Church in Ridgewood. We held it there because it was a good enough space. They let us have it, and we thought it would be interesting to do some poems about based on people's birthdays or events. So we started off with Fats Domino and Elvis, and we had a poetry reading, themed poems around certain event. We got through Ella Fitzgerald, and we said, let's do baseball. So we decided to do right around the time that the movie 42 came out about Jackie Robinson, and we paired it up with a birthday of another local native up here, and grew up in went to school in Patterson. That would be Larry Doby. He was the first, I guess, like African American to be in the American leagues, and of course Jackie Robinson being the first African American in the National League.
Yep.
So we had that themed poetry event around baseball, and this is one of the poems that I had written for that event.
Okay.
And it's about Jackie Robinson. I don't know if you wanted me to get into it now.
Please. Set it up. Go right ahead. Yep.
Okay. This is called Jackie on Third. Some people say baseball is such a slow game. But put Jackie on third and he'll slow it down even more. Funny how speed slows things down. Look at him, the intricate dance, how he tiptoes down the line. In truth, the game really slowed when he was announced and came out of the dugout, came up to the plate. Sometimes the catcher said something, or a pitcher served a message, or a knucklehead in the stands bellowed from the wrong side of history. Jackie would take his time stepping back in and then hit a rope and be smiling from the safety of first base. That would start it. Throw over, throw. Speed, slowing down the game. And do you think Jackie would merely take second? No. He already owned second. And as he stands there, the roar would overcome the crowd. And the retelling of this moment to sons and grandsons becomes like the stillness of a photograph or like a movie frozen in time when sound stops inside the single frame. And then the reel slowly winds forward, reveals, see there, just the tiniest flicker, a tick in the hand of the pitcher. And after he sets his motion, and before he even moves to throw the ball home, the roar comes alive as Jackie is dusting himself off, standing on third base. Some people say baseball is such a slow game. Maybe so when you think about it, the way you should. What's the count? How many outs? What inning? What's the score? How many on? Who's at bat? A purposeful slowness if you lay the grid of history on the field of play. How far is it from the minors to the game? From Montreal to Brooklyn? How far from Selma to Washington, D.C.? All of that matters. But the game is in real time, and none of it is of any consequence to Jackie. Jackie on third. We remember Jackie, the dedication, the resolve, the legacy, Jackie on third, and the whole roaring tide of the world as it tips forward. It's in baseball that we remember our past. It's in baseball that we can imagine our possibilities. It is in baseball that we discover our greatness. Jackie calculates it all. He sees everything in the pitcher's eyes. You can't stop me. You can't stop me. You can't stop this. I'm coming home now.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well done.
Thank you.
Really, really nice. Really well written and well read. Appreciate that. Quite a guy.
Thank you.
Quite a guy. I've been reading a lot about the things people had to go through to travel. Some of these things we see on some of these films and whatnot, but to really think about it on a day-to-day basis and what, they might be traveling with a team, or they might be, for instance, like the gentleman in the movie on Green Book, the film, and they'd have to stay in a different hotel.
Yeah.
I remember as a young child, I was, or in the early 60s, we went on a trip to Washington, D.C., and it was the only time that I'd ever seen a whites-only water fountain. But I remember seeing that. And I remember being confused on why I couldn't drink out of the other one that was there. So it's just, little things that are kind of part of your background. look, we're white guys. We can only imagine it. Maybe even if you study it and read it and spend many, many hours and days and weeks and months, then it's still not the same as living it. And
yeah, I remember a lot of the, I guess, growing up, I was still a very young boy in the 50s, but it was really the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which I was,
right.
A teenager during, and I opened up really a lot of the public facilities to all of the races. That was the purpose of that. But it was really the movement against segregation really began in 1947, I guess, with Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, there have been other people along the way. For instance, Jim Thorpe in sports is an American Indian.
Yeah.
For some reason, sports just has a way to get people to look at someone differently. And look, there's, one of the things I often wondered is if I had been born in the South, would I have been a racist? If that was my background and that was my upbringing, and that's what had been fed to me day in, day out, would I end up that way? And I'd probably end up thinking I would have. Just like, average people in Germany became Nazis. And, it's just like crowd theory in a way.
You're heavily influenced by your context, but, you're a thinking person. I think you would have broken out of it, though.
I would hope so. I mean, I would hope so. I certainly know that if you're in the North and you get and you were fed, some other material as well, and maybe if you had a religious upbringing, you might see it. And I would hope so. But I guess one of the things I was saying earlier was it's just seems to be part of the human experience in general, and it's part of our ignorance, our blindness, our selfishness to want to dominate somebody else in some way or the other, and we find whatever feature that is to do that. And our country, in particular, was the point where a systematic hatred was industrialized to the point where millions of people were tangled up in it. It wasn't, it's like it was. Go ahead.
It was all for like economic benefit of a large portion of the southern states,
Southern states?
People,
Yep.
though. Certain few people. Of course,
the industrialization part of it was basically, once they could build and consistently drive ships back and forth across the ocean without too many losses, and they could create settlements elsewhere, then they needed labor. And then they most of the people who landed in New Amsterdam in New York, the first people that came up there to work that were slaves, indentured slaves, not indentured, but slaves, were straight out of the Caribbean.
Yep.
So yeah, economic benefit, selfishness, blindness, all the things I mentioned. For some reason, people can overlook it for whatever reason. And I guess the deeper you are in it financially, the easier it is to overlook it. I guess. I mean, I don't know. I couldn't possibly allow that to happen. I don't think.
Yeah, we don't. A lot of the things we don't need. We don't need the greed. We don't need that entanglement over others. Should be able to give it up.
We should be able to, but we seem to come a long way and then we fall back again. But I hope there's progress. I do think there is, and I think pointing out a guy who broke barriers like Jackie Robinson in your poem is certainly an important topic to discuss. And I'm glad you were able to join us.
It's a continuing struggle, and I think it's an important one.
Yeah. Well, if there's some way, we can break through this. It's got to be first through openly admitting the problems. And look, there's thousands of books out there on it. You just have to pick them up and read them. And most of the people who are still stuck in whatever level of hatred that they're in just don't understand history. They don't understand the prison systems, and they don't understand the things that people went through over the years. Now that doesn't doesn't say that, moving forward, if we can fix things and improve them, that there isn't another half of the bargain where people have to accept that help and accept that attempt to seek forgiveness and move ahead themselves. Because there's reverse racism as well as a result of the first case of racism. So it's back and forth. We've got to find a way to get along here. But thank you so much for coming on. I got Paul Jeanes coming up in a here. He's sitting there. If you'd like to listen along as well, please do.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Great start. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. I hope you'll join us again and bring another poem for us.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that a plan? All right. Thanks very much. And take good care. Ruben, you want to hook Paul up? Take him off of there? He's still on mute.
There we go. Here I am.
There you are, Paul. How you doing, buddy?
Good, good. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm glad you could join us. It's a good night when a good man like you will come on on the air here and talk to people.
You're very kind. It's a pleasure to be with you. This is great.
Well, I appreciate all of the posts you're making on Facebook about Frederick Buechner. And just by a little way of history, Paul was my parish priest at Trinity Church in Princeton. And I know Paul was in Kentucky as well prior to that. Can you just tell us a little bit of your background, Paul?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Kentucky, raised by in a Baptist tradition, Baptist family, mom, dad, sister, 4 of us there. Lived most of my life in Kentucky, really, besides college, until coming to Princeton 12 years ago. And raised in that Baptist tradition, I said, and then became an Episcopalian, made a transition in my 20s, and then became an Episcopal priest, which is something I did not intend on doing. Didn't see that one on the field. And ended up becoming a priest in my 30s, and now I've been a priest for 22 years now. And as I came to Princeton, most unexpectedly to me, 12 years ago. And I think, Don, you've heard me say in church before, how in the world that the boy from Kentucky got to New Jersey, I don't have any idea, but this is where I came. So, and I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're glad you came. Funny how things work out.
It's amazing. And I heard you speaking with the previous guest, just a little bit about how, if you were raised in the South and being raised in the South and the implications of certain things. And at least my wife and I have talked a lot about that, about the sort of implications of how you're raised, the importance of the context in which you're raised. And she was raised in California and then raised in Spain and Argentina in a very different culture and people and understanding. In Kentucky, it was there was just racism. It was just sort of there, and I didn't really see it when you're a boy growing up. When you're a child, it's just the way things are, right? You don't sit there and think with a critical eye, or you don't think about, well, what does this mean, and what's the significance of that, and why this? But then when you step back a little bit, you go, holy cow! I mean, that was this blatantly a sort of multi-tiered system, economic system, social system that was not fair. It wasn't meant to be fair. It was meant to be, well, that's just the way it is, and that's just too bad. And some of the things, that I heard growing up within the culture, within family at times, you reflect upon it and go, oh my gosh. I mean, how is that happening? And not to excuse, but I mean, in our family was, I'm going to say, not bad. If you could say you're not a bad racist, you know what I mean? But it was like, what we heard, I know, was mild compared to, others within a Southern and even deeper Southern culture. Right. So it makes an incredible impact, I think. Yeah.
Well, I was, as mentioned earlier, that, the 250 some odd years, I'm not sure the exact number of years. I know it started somewhere in the early 1600s when they, the first 8 slaves were brought to New York or New Amsterdam at the time, part of the trading company that came over. It's been part of our economic system and country for so long, and for many generations, and for many generations of people enslaved as well. We finally had this culminating battle in 1860s, leading up to the Emancipation Proclamation, but it still hadn't eradicated the hatred. The need to dominate. And so then they had the Reconstruction period, in which basically they just rewrote the laws so that everybody weren't slaves technically, but they really still were.
Right.
You know?
And I forgot, and I feel so ignorant, because I didn't even realize we were invited last summer, and I'm going to horrifically forgotten it now. I was not even aware of I believe it's Juneteenth celebration, that African Americans use for their Day of Independence, as opposed to July 4th, of when finally the last, I believe, is that what it is, Juneteenth? I'm horribly embarrassed by that. But
well, I'm embarrassed to say that I know that name, but I never knew exactly what it was, and there you go. That just shows you.
So we were invited to a gala, or an event in New York City. 95% people of color there, and we just happened to be invited by some friends and said, please join us for the celebration. I said, well, what is it? And I was so embarrassed that I had not even heard that the African-American community celebrates a different Day of Independence, because they said, well, on your July 4th, we were still slaves. We weren't free. So it was finally in a day in June, I believe it was, and I forgot the year, but several years after the war and the emancipation, et cetera, that it finally reached Texas. So finally, like the last slaves were finally freed in Texas. So then they said, we'll celebrate our day of freedom. But even then, it wasn't freedom, and it was just renamed and shuffled around.
Just to elaborate on that just a little bit, I mean, the folks really had nowhere to go, and they had no assets, they had no money, they had nothing to do. So most of them ended up staying right on the land that they had already worked before, but now as sharecroppers. And plantation owner was the same jerk who had them all those years. And of course, he didn't give them a fair deal when they turned in their crop. He didn't give them. He didn't tell them the right weight of what they turned in, and he gave them basically enough to just live and keep going. That's exactly the way they wanted. And the sharecropper system lasted up into the 30s, and beyond. It was just, and then of course they rewrote some of the laws so they had get a guy for public whatever disorderly conduct and put him in prison for 5 years, and then the prison labor was put out on the plantation to work. So it was the same thing.
No, it's amazing, and I think about too. Sometimes it boggles my mind that this was all still so active and alive when I was.
I know.
When I was in Kentucky as a boy, I'm 55, so 1965, segregation was still very real. And then when they introduced mandated integration of the school systems and busing, I mean, people went bananas. And this was going to be the downfall of civilization. This was going to be, craziness. And I was like, what? And I look back upon it and go, I mean, that wasn't that long ago.
No, we're just in the infancy of this thing. We got a long way to go. Obviously, there's still a lot of rage and hatred that's going on. There's still a lot of things that, there's still bad cops out there. There's still, court systems that don't give it a fair shake. And I don't want to blanket anybody, any sort of accusation, but it's just time for everybody to kind of step back and recognize there's a bias there. There's something in your own heart and soul along the way that needs to get fixed. And look, this part of the things that's coming up with this current environment where you're seeing health disparities, all of a sudden they're pointed out. I think there's a lot of aha moments for people right now.
I think there are. I think one thing that's been, and mentioned it to you before, that's been particularly on my mind lately as we're living in the time of social distancing and shelter in place. And here you are at a nice home. I have a nice home to live in with 3 or 4 bedrooms, and there's plenty of room for us. And so we're sheltering in place in a lovely home, and we're restricted to like taking walks around our comfortable neighborhood. You know, it's not like we're actually suffering.
Right. We're not. I know, and you know, and we're also look. I'm retired, and I'm not worried about losing my job. People have lost their jobs. The system, you know, doesn't quite work to get all the benefits or different things out to people. I mean, it's too big, quite frankly, or they haven't worked on it hard enough yet. So there's a lot of disparity there. Now we do have a system. Like, I don't want to completely knock, the capitalist system of giving people a fair leg up. But let's face it, if you're from a poor neighborhood and you go to a crappy school, and you know you don't have the chances that other people have, you're not going to have the best outcome.
Correct. Right. No. It's, you know, you sort of marinate in the sauce, and the sauce gets in you. You know, and if you're sort of growing up in an environment and culture that's all around you all the time, it sort of sinks in, and that's really a hard thing. You know, just going to a summer camp or an after school, it's really hard to work through all of those things that a child is growing up in all the time. And sometimes, you know, an hour after school program is great. Summer camps are great. But then they go back home or back to whatever reality is the reality. And it's so hard to work against that sort of constant onslaught and wave of forces beating kids and families down. You know, one thing that you know, with this time of the virus and being at home, my sister has been a prison chaplain for a good portion of her ministry and life. And we were talking the other night on the phone and talking about the incarceration system, and the number of people we have incarcerated in our country is phenomenally high and greatly disproportionate to those of color, minority, and more at-risk populations. And so there's a justice system that I don't think is particularly fair. And then I was just thinking particularly about in solitary confinement and incarceration itself. I'm getting off balance in my home with a yard and the freedom to walk around the block. And if you stick a human being in the cell the size of a bathroom with no windows and no contact for a year, it's inhumane. And we do it to people, and particularly disproportionately to people of color. Disproportionately people of color. And that's a justice system that's not a justice system. It's tweaked. It's just not...
Well, I mean, the system itself, yes. And that's why I believe it all goes back to schools, because if you're in a police station, and you get a call, come in, there's a crime going on my street, you've got to respond to that call.
Right.
And if there's more crime going on somewhere else, you're going to be responding more calls there. Now, are there racist cops? Yes. Are there people that are picked up for no good reason? Yes. Are there... but I think a lot of the numbers represent the fact that there is more crime in certain areas and cities, and they go there. Now, is there harassment of certain people? I believe so. I believe that's true. So some percentage of that, I believe, is just from out-and-out racism. But the racism is really more in the fact that redlining back in the period of towards the end of the Great Migration, the 40s, when everybody was really, the migration started up to the north, people were isolated into pockets and were never able to integrate and break out. And so that created just systematic problems throughout. There's, family situations. Hell, that goes back to the very beginning. Break people apart from the very beginning. Well, how the heck are you supposed to want to, keep your household together when you're not even used to having a household together, generation after generation after generation after generation? Now, there's a lot of people, and you got to give so much credit to the people who hung tough, kept their faith, kept their families together, and just, walked the walk, walked right through the whole thing. I mean, there's just some tremendous human beings that have made it through. I
remember because Don, I'm pretty white. I'm just a white boy from the South, you know. And I remember having dinner with James Cone one night, wrote Crossing the Lynching Tree, some other wonderful, wonderful books, Black liberation theologian. And I would have conversations, and he would look at me and say, "You're so white." And I go, "I know I am. I know." And I would admit it. I would say, like, "I'm so white." And he'd go, "Right, right, right." And I'd say, "Jim, what do you do? What do I do?" He said, "Just be with us and be empathetic. Try to think about who we are. Have some empathy for us and the struggle we've been on, because we are who we are. You're white and I'm not. And there's some realities. Just be aware of the realities that make up our world, and don't act like they're not there. You know, your engagement in the world is very different than my engagement with the world and the world with me, for no other reason than his skin is black and mine's white. You know, on a sort of level." And so sometimes when you talk to white people about that, they go, "Oh, no. You know, you can do whatever, you can do this." I'm going, really? You know, there's still really, and one thing, I know the time's running out, but I thought when I came to more north that it wouldn't be. Well, it's here too. It's here too.
Yeah.
You know, I just don't know how we break through. I pray to God every day. I look at my kids and they see a different world than I
believe
do.
so. I believe so.
And that makes me very hopeful, very hopeful.
And that's why a couple of white guys like me and you need to get on the radio every now and just say stuff like this, because people need to know that times are changing, and they need to learn a little bit more about what's happened in the past and understand a little bit more. And so I'm really, really glad that you came on, and I'll ask you to come on again soon. And
love to come on. So thank you for doing this. Wonderful to be with you, and what a privilege. So thanks so much. I'd love to come back anytime. It'd be great.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks very much, Paul. I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, yeah, man. Thank you so much. Have a great night. Thank you now.
Okay. I think you have to click out on your end. I mean, you don't have to click out.
I
But we're just about done. All right. Well, time is up. We're done here at 10 o'clock. I just want to point out one more time, Hang John Brown by Donald Mann. It's on Amazon.com. You can Kindle, where you can get a hard copy like this. You got to put in Hang John Brown by Donald Mann for it to come up. Great book. There's another great book that I just read called American Prison, and that's a fabulous book, all about the history of the prison system. It's about a guy who just went undercover inside the prison systems in Louisiana. Really interesting story. And this is a marvelous book here, too. It was kind of popular after the last election, Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. He's a guy that grew up in Appalachia, and he also had a education at Yale and journalism. And so he came forward with some really interesting insights into what it's like to grow up poor in Appalachia. So there's a lot of understanding that has to happen around the world, and we've got a lot of problems to figure out, but we're not going to figure them out, and we're not going to get any better if we don't admit our past sins, admit our past problems. Once that's done, once we see the value in each other, then we can forge a new past and move on. So thank you very much for stopping in and listening in. We'll be on every other Tuesday, the first and third Tuesdays of the month. And hope to hear some voices out there. We'll have a conversation. So remember, mind, body, spirit, work on them. Thanks very much. Good night.